There. My latest invention.
What, a police box?
Of course not.
This is TARDIS.
TARDIS?
It stands for Time and Relative Dimension in Space.
Oh.
Go inside. Go on.
Okay, retro go. Let's go.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen. It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 296. And our movie this week from 1965 is Doctor Who and the Daleks. And joining me to talk about it, they had not seen it before, it's Ace returning. Ace, how you doing?
Too bad. Not too bad at all. Things have been shitty. So, well, sorry for the swear, but they've been bad, and I needed some escapism. So why don't we go with the Doctor?
Right.
Or
I mean,
is he?
well, he is Doctor Who. We'll say that. We can definitively say that.
Yes.
All right. So before we dive too much into this particular movie, what is your knowledge of it and of the character in Doctor Who in general? Just give kind of a basic rundown of like, how did you come about this movie itself and sort of the character?
Well, I think everyone knows by now from this show that I'm a massive Whovian. I got my nickname early on before I changed it to Ash as Ace from Doctor Who.
Okay. Yep.
I think everyone knows by now the Seventh Doctor's companion, Ace. She was famous for being a punk from Perryvale who used a baseball bat, the Hand of Omega, to beat up Daleks.
Mhm.
So that was my first experience with Doctor Who and everything. And I went through, I watched it. Well, no, actually, my first experience was with David Tennant when he regenerated. Literally, I watched his regeneration episode as my very first episode ever.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, which let me tell you, that was as a first time viewer, that was very chaotic to say the least. Because I'm
Yeah.
sitting there, she was an awesome companion Faye. But I'm sitting there, Timothy Dalton's on the show as Rassilon. I'm sitting there like, why is James Bond on this show?
Right.
Like, it made no sense to me. It was like, okay, and then it was I understood the basic plot, but I didn't understand the show.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so it gets no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's impossible to understand the show initially. Like you can watch that show for years and still not fully understand it. But anyway, so that was your first episode. So
That was
getting
my
into the
first
show.
episode. So yeah, I'm getting into the show. I follow up with Matt Smith as he starts, and then I started doing more research. Mind you, I think Dr. David Tennant, was it 2009, 2010 when he regenerated? Now, mind you, this was
Yeah.
also this was the first time he was on the show.
Right.
Like, I'm not saying the 14th Doctor. That's why we say, you can start the show from day one and still never understand it. And yeah, it was New Year's Day 2010 when he
Okay.
regenerated. So I'm sitting there New Year's Day, bored out of my mind because it's New Year's, and I put it on the BBC, and I'm like, oh, okay. So the end of the episode, he's doing the whole, regenerating, the whole looking at his hand as it's glowing, and he looks at the camera and he goes, I don't want to go.
Right.
And I'm sitting there like, no, spiky haired man, what are you talking about? No, don't go. Like, I just met you.
Right. Yeah. You're just meeting this guy and he's already leaving.
And then Matt Smith comes on, with his Geronimo, like he literally pulls his hair down and he's like, I'm a girl.
Yep.
And I'm like, valid. I hadn't come out yet, but I still said valid. And then he does the whole Geronimo, and they cliffhanger and everything. And I'm like, I need to know more. I need to know more
Yeah.
about the show, about the character, everything else. And it was like I went down the rabbit hole and then found out that Peter Cushing played the Doctor. Except it's not the Doctor. The genuine article, you might say,
Mm.
to quote the show. Basically, to actually get into the movie and my knowledge of it, I knew of the movie. I know of its sequel. I know that it's based off the first Doctor Who serial, The Daleks.
Right.
But there
The
are
first
a
appearance.
lot of, well, yes, the first appearance of the Daleks with the first Doctor played by William Hartnell, who is a wonderful actor himself.
Mhm.
They got Peter Cushing of Hammer Horror Films to play Doctor Who.
Yep.
And I'm not gonna discredit Peter Cushing or anything, as an actor or as playing this character. I love Peter Cushing. For all those gore fans out there, I am a huge Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Hammer Horrors fan. Love those movies. I love them better than I love the newer stuff.
Mhm.
But so I hadn't watched the movie because when I read about it and there was some murkiness about the character and everything, I'm
Yeah.
just like, do I really want to watch this? If it's
Yeah.
not the Doctor, why would I want to watch it?
So this movie has a reputation about it of like, oh, it's not good. Oh, it's not canon, blah, blah, blah. So the funny thing about that is this movie comes out in 1965. Doctor Who as a series started in 1963.
Yep.
So we're only a year or two into to Doctor Who and the Who mania at the time this came out. Basically, Amicus Films wanted to capitalize on the Dalek mania in the UK at the time because the Daleks had been on Doctor Who. They were huge everywhere. So like we're gonna capitalize on that. Let's make this movie. So they optioned uh, to make a 3 picture trilogy based around that first serial. So they actually optioned it from Terry Nation, who was the writer of the Doctor Who serial, The Daleks. Which funny thing is because in the opening credits for this movie, it says based on the television serial by Terry Nation. A lot of people misconstrued that as
Hmm.
Terry Nation created Doctor Who when
Right.
he didn't create Doctor Who. He created the Daleks. He wrote that first serial. But that aside, they optioned it for £500, I think is what it was,
I think
and
so.
decided they were going to make these movies. And so they did. Well, it was kind of one of those things where uh, there wasn't a lot of established lore at the time that this was made. So they were readapting and they took some creative liberties with it, which we're going to talk about for
Boy,
sure.
howdy did they.
But it was sort of my parallel to this because if you look back at it now, this doesn't fit in with the larger Doctor Who kind of canon in general, which, to be fair, is incredibly murky and contradictory anyway.
Right. And realistically, it's not supposed to fit in with the
Mhm.
canon of
Right.
Doctor Who.
But it would sort of
It's
be like if you made a Star Trek film in 68 or 69, a year or two into the Star Trek run, and you made a film, but you took a single episode of, say, season 1 of the original series Star Trek and adapted that and rewrote it that early on. That's sort of what they were doing here. So if you did that, it would be very different from what Star Trek became after its series ran and then more movies and all those characters and everything like that. So it's sort of like that, which is why I can kind of give it a little bit of a pass in terms of
yeah.
like, it's not the same thing, but it's still a lot of fun. And there's also, they just didn't know at the time. Like in this, Peter Cushing is playing Doctor Who. He's credited and named in this as Doctor Who, and he's a human inventor,
Yeah.
which honestly isn't that far off the story at the
Well,
time.
I was going to say that actually. in the original Doctor, like I'm talking the original, the first, played by
Yep.
William Hartnell,
Yes.
it was murky on actually where the Doctor came from. Because early on they don't mention Time Lords and Gallifrey, and even regeneration was still another 3-4 years. Well, in this case, in the movie's case, it was another like 6 months to a year off. In the show's case, it was another year to 6 months off. But there was no such thing as regeneration yet. So
Right.
very early on, it was assumed that the character played by William Hartnell, and I'm going to confuse William Hartnell and Peter Cushing when I'm talking about this left and right, so don't mind me. But because I mean, they're both technically the first Doctor.
Right.
But the idea was that he doesn't. I don't think early on they mention it, but later on in the show, William Hartnell's character does say, "Have you ever wondered what it's like to be exiles?" And he does start to mention that he's basically implying he's from another planet.
Hmm.
Everything. But in the first few episodes, in this case, the Daleks, they make no mention of any of that. And so we, the viewers, back in 1963, 1964, 1965, were left to wonder, well, to use the show's title, Doctor Who.
Yeah. Hmm.
And in the early episodes of the show, the Doctor himself was called Doctor Who. Dr. period Who. It wasn't until later on, and even then in the show's classic run, as they call it, they would alternate between the Doctor and Doctor Who, or just Doctor. It wasn't until David Tennant came to the show and said, no, his name is the Doctor, period. David Tennant himself says the show's title asks a question, Doctor Who? And the answer is the Doctor.
Yeah, and
But
it's the thing where they play around with that all the time anyway.
yeah, yeah.
So, but yeah, it
Actually,
wasn't. Go ahead.
well, I just wanted to say, Faye's not too far off. There is the case, in this case, of it being a part of the multiverse, technically. It's really, like, the show plays around with it itself, just to get a little bit of trivia out here real quick. In the 50th anniversary episode, The Day of the Doctor, there were supposed to be movie posters for this movie and the Dalek invasion 2051 AD. Stephen Moffat wanted them in the show to have a little nod to Peter Cushing
Hmm.
in the show to show that, hey, he played a version of the Doctor. And
Yeah.
the story, and it actually says it in the novelization, the idea was that Unit produced these movies to show the fictionalized version of the Doctor, and that the Doctor is actually a big fan of the movies and a big fan of Peter Cushing, even offering up bits and pieces of their costume to Peter Cushing to wear in these movies.
I mean, that would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So,
Unfortunately, they couldn't before. They would have had to buy the complete rights to the movies, and the budget for the 50th anniversary just wouldn't allow that.
yeah, I can see that.
So,
But it's one of those things where it's fine. Like I don't mind that, and I don't mind them even readapting and changing a few things. So some of the changes that they made, adapting the Daleks serial into this film, because that was a 7-part, I believe.
yes, it was a 7-part that ran from, I have it pulled up, so give me two, that ran from December 21st, 1963 to February 1st, 1964.
Yeah. So they trimmed it down. It's basically the same story, but they trimmed it down, streamlined it a little bit, and made some characterization changes. So number one being that Doctor Who is fully on human inventor, and he's just invented the TARDIS, or TARDIS. It's not even the TARDIS. It's just
No,
TARDIS in
it's
this.
hard. Yeah.
We do have the same companions with him, which is Ian, Barbara, and Susan. But Barbara and Susan are both his
Right.
granddaughters. With Ian being Barbara's boyfriend. Ian and Barbara are no longer school teachers, and Susan is a bit younger now. She's like 11 as opposed to being in her teens. Um, and basically, the way the story unfolds with Ian comes over to see Barbara, and Doctor Who takes him out to show him his newest invention, TARDIS. They go inside, they're looking around in it. It's still a blue police phone box. It's still bigger on the inside, but it looks completely different, which I both didn't like, but also kind of liked, because it's not the inside of the TARDIS that I'm used to and that anybody who watched the series or has watched it is used to. It doesn't have any of those trappings, but it is this really cool, just like cracked out mad scientist lab full of lights and switches and wires slapdashed everywhere. And it's really cool looking.
Yeah. Yeah, when I first saw it, when I watched the movie, now I watched it twice. I watched it earlier this week and then I watched it today just to refresh myself.
Mhm.
Both times I went, where are the round things? And
Yeah,
then I was like, this actually fits a little bit better than the one we get in the show. It truly creates the vibe that he's a madman with a box.
kind of. Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
Just a
Um,
little more. Now, there are some parallels to the show as well. For example, when Ian asks TARDIS, it's Susan that goes, it stands for time and relative dimension in space.
mhm.
So there still are some similarities. There are a lot more deviations from it.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, there are, but the basic plot is kind of the same. Like they get inside the TARDIS, he's showing it off, and Barbara comes in, and then they accidentally end up turning it on and end up on a alien planet. They never name the planet; they're just on
no,
some other
yeah, they
planets.
don't.
And while they're there, they look around a little bit. They see a city, but they don't want to. Ian and Barbara don't want to go to the city.
Right.
The Doctor does for sure. Susan does, because they're both just enamored with the science and the exploration. So he says, "Oh well, we can't leave because this thing is broken, and maybe they'll have stuff for it in the city."
The fluid link.
Yeah, the fluid link, and it needs mercury.
Yeah,
So
that's
they,
actually a thing that they mention in the show as well.
Mhm, that's right.
So it's
And
so
again, they had some basic idea, because the script was adapted by uh, Milton Sabatsky, who
yeah.
was the head of the production company. He was also the producer. But then, was credited to Terry Nation as well, because he came up with the original. And one of the writers of the series did help do a little punch up on the script and kind of and do that. So they had people that were familiar with Doctor Who to work on this. But I love that he's like, oh, this thing is broken. Well, guess we're gonna have to go into the city anyway. And you can sort of tell already, like, he's totally making that up. Nothing's broken, but he wants to go check out the
Yeah.
city. None of them are smart enough to notice that. Even Susan plays along with it, um, which I loved. So they go into the city. It's empty. There's no one there, and they're feeling a little off as they get in there. Before they end up running into Daleks, and this was the main reason that this movie got made, were the Daleks, and they, for the most part, kept the look of them pretty similar. There are a couple tweaks to what
There
was
are a
in the
couple of
original
tweaks, yeah.
series.
Yeah, there are, and they did that on purpose to try to differentiate a little bit between the movie and the show. They also didn't have the same actors playing the Daleks. There were a lot of other, like, they didn't have,
They had some
obviously,
though.
they had some of them, but not all. Because if you'll notice, if you watch the movie and you watch the TV show, even from the 1960s, the voices are different.
But a couple of the voice people were from the series. They just went
Yeah.
uncredited.
The other
And
thing is the Daleks' lights continue to flash even when they're not talking. Like the producers of the movie didn't realize that lights are supposed to flash when they're talking.
so that was a Gordon Fleming thing. The director didn't know
Yeah,
that, and he just thought it would look more interesting if the lights were going all the time or at random intervals and whatnot, to make it more visually interesting. And so because of that, in the edit, they had to like play around with some of the vocal stuff, and it got a little
Yeah.
bit more staccato even than normal because of that. Because
Right.
they just Gordon Fleming didn't know that, and apparently nobody told him ahead of time. There were points where it did sync though, so I think maybe partway through filming somebody mentioned it to him. It's hard to say, but yeah, that was a little jarring at first. It kind of threw me.
Okay. Right. And another thing is they were fitted with a two-jawed mechanical claw instead of a plunger. If you saw the 60th anniversary stuff, there was a online video that showed David Tennant's 14th Doctor going to Skaro as they were invented, and
Mhm.
they had the claws from the movie, and David Tennant runs his TARDIS literally jams into one of the Daleks and kills it. And it's like the assistant to Davros didn't know what to do because Davros was known as this maniacal, genocidal, homicidal maniac, and
Mhm.
obviously the guy didn't want to die. So the Doctor goes, trying to conceal his he was literally at the genesis of the Daleks, which is a TV show title, but
Yep.
and he goes, hold on a minute, goes back into the TARDIS and pulls out the plunger.
I
But I
love.
thought that was yeah, I loved it, and I thought it was a great callback to include the movie as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple of them that do have the plunger. I also like that. Now this is the first Doctor Who property that was in color,
Yeah,
and this was filmed in Technicolor, and it's bright, and I love that. And to this point, the series had been all black and white, and that was really cool because you had differentiation in the Daleks. You could tell there was the black one and the red one, and then a bunch of blue ones, and
yeah.
so from as an audience, it's great because immediately you know these two are a little bit different. I love the blue, by the way. The blue Dalek is such a cool color scheme and design, in my opinion. I think those colors worked really well together.
They did. Now, what's interesting is that um, Doctor Who itself, the TV show, didn't first start appearing in color until January of 1970.
Hmm. Yeah,
This movie came out August 23rd, 1965. So it was roughly 4.5 years between the movie and the TV show before the TV show was colorized.
yeah. And they have since released on, I believe it's a Blu-ray of the original serial, The Daleks, but in color. They've colorized it.
Yes. Yes,
So
they have.
there are technically three versions of this particular story arc you can watch. You can watch the original, you can watch this movie, and you can watch the Daleks in color. Um,
Now, if you're going to
so
watch Doctor Who proper, I would not recommend watching this movie, or you'll just be all kinds of confused.
I mean, it is going to confuse you, but we'll kind of I want to get to that whole idea a little bit later on. So Doctor Who and his companions, they meet the Daleks. They're captured. Um, I did notice, so whenever you streamline a story and take something that is 7 parts of, I think the episodes are roughly 20 something minutes long, if I
Yeah,
remember
about
correctly.
25, about 20. Like I have the Wikipedia page up right now. In fact, the first couple are about 24 minutes. The third one's 25. Then the next two are 24. Then the sixth one is 26, and then the last one's 22.
But you're talking about something that is 2.5 hours, let's say, roughly, worth of footage. If 7 episodes, about 20 something minutes, so you're 140, tack on a few more, you're 150, 160 minutes. So you're
Yeah,
about 230 to 240, 2 hours and 40 minutes in length for
yeah.
your story. You're cutting that down to this movie, which is an hour 20. When doing that, some of your characters are going to change. And in this case, uh, Susan, Barbara, and Ian kind of, and to an extent, the Doctor, all get very streamlined. But Barbara kind of doesn't really have much of a character here. She's
No,
sort
she
of,
really honestly doesn't.
and in fact, one of my notes was Barbara just goes from zero to screaming really quickly. Like the first 20 minutes of this movie is mostly her screaming at things when she's on screen.
To be fair, that kind of happens in the TV show too, especially the Dalek episodes.
True, and it was sort of a sign of the times, but she has nothing else to do really. Like,
Yeah, no, honestly, they could have cut Barbara and just kept Susan and Ian, and it would have made a lot more sense.
um, yeah, I mean, Susan's got a little bit more to do because she's kind of this precocious kid, and she's a little bit of a know-it-all. She's the science nerd. I love, by the way, love the opening shot of the movie where it's Susan's reading the physics book, Barbara's reading the science of science, and then the doctor's reading a comic book, and he's all
Have you been smoking
he's all giddy
grass?
about the comic book. It was really really fun. So they get captured, and they realized while they were moving around, they found a Geiger counter, and there is severe radiation all over this planet from something that happened before, and they're all getting sick from it. Which probably, I am guessing, I haven't watched the original serial in a while, but I feel like that was probably more of a plot point and maybe more tension
Um,
related in that, because it's sort of, we're getting sick, and then like 2 scenes later, well, we're cured now, and everything's fine because they get the medicine, the drugs that were left for them. The Daleks send Susan back out to the TARDIS to get this box that they found. So now they're back captured, and the Daleks
I
have
was gonna
them.
say, yeah, that this is literally they followed as much of the plot of the serial as they could.
Mhm.
Like obviously the character, because like I'm reading it on the Wikipedia article as you're talking, and yeah, everything boils down to this serial, and I mean there are some differences obviously, but plot point for plot point, it was dead on with the serial,
Mhm. Yeah, they
which
they took a
is
lot of that, which is good.
yeah,
We find out that the Daleks were in a war centuries before with the Thal,
yeah,
and they were the two life forms on this planet. They got in a big old war, nuclear bombs dropped, whatever, and the Daleks. One of the things I like is how they want the medicine from the Thal because they think that will help them get out of their metal, these containers that they're in. They're basically in little metal suits of armor that's protecting them, but they also can't leave their city because of
right.
them wearing this thing. And so they
And
think,
actually, there's the first plot point deviation.
okay,
In the serial, the Daleks purposely can't. Well, in the serial, the Daleks can't survive without radiation.
okay,
They can leave. They can leave the city. They can leave. They're planning to leave Skaro. They want to leave the city. Like in the serial, I don't think the movie. I don't think the show is. I don't think the planet is called Skaro yet in the serial. I think that happens with the second or maybe third. I'm not exactly sure, but in the show, the Daleks can leave the city no problem. In the show, they have to survive on radiation. Like at this point, Davros wasn't created yet as a character. We don't
mm,
know who actually created the Daleks. We don't know why the Daleks were created. We just know that they live on this planet. They're encased in metal, and that's it
yeah,
about the Daleks. So there was more. It's the wrong type of lore, and it's wrong from the show perspective. But
well,
from the movie perspective, there's more lore about the Daleks in an 82-minute movie than there were in a 7-week, 22-minute, roughly, TV show.
and what I would say is it's not so much that I would consider it to be wrong as different. Um, I can see
Ye-
the idea
Yeah,
of wrong, but it's a different backstory. But one of the things I think that I like about it now, they don't go anywhere with this, and it's sort of not utilized. But by making the Daleks want the medicine from the Thal in order to get out of these things, and have dialogue from the Daleks being like, we want to get out of this metal and move around, does make them a little more interesting because it gives them a bit of a tragic nature, a bent to them, where they're trapped in these metal trash cans that they're rolling around in, and they're trapped in this city and they can't leave. And that could have been used I think, as a motivation, better for them. Now, it wasn't, the execution of that wasn't great,
Yeah.
but it's kind of a cool seed of an idea that I think would have been neat to go along with.
Honestly, it was. In the show, for example, in this movie, the Daleks need the radiation medicine to be able to leave the city. It was their own fault for doing all this in the first place, but they need the medication to get out of the city and get off the planet so they can start exterminating all the other planets and everything else. In the TV show, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bring up comparisons between the serial and the movie, just because the movie is based off the serial, and I think it would be
Sure.
interesting for people to hear the differences.
Hmm.
The Daleks attempt to use the anti-radiation drugs in the show, but they find out that it's fatal to them. In the movie, they take the medication and find out it works fine.
Well, no, it doesn't work in the movie. That's the whole.
It doesn't. No, you're
No,
right. You're right.
they have the
Yeah.
whole scene, and they find out because they get it, and then they find out it doesn't work for them. So now that that's no longer a thing. They're just going to. That's when they decide they're just going to re-nuke the whole thing. They're going to drop their
Oh, that's
neutron
right.
bomb,
Yeah. Yeah.
and make it so there's so much radiation that the Thal can't exist either because their medicine won't work anymore. So
Oh, and it turns
basically,
out no, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, basically, the Daleks want all the medicine from the Thal. So they offered them food to lure them in. And the Thal,
Right.
one of the things in this that is silly, but again, it's a silly sci-fi movie, is the naivete of the Thal, most of them, where they're like, there's one that's like, dude, we don't want to go into this city. Like, these are the Daleks. They tried to wipe us out hundreds of years ago. And the other guy's like, nah, it's fine. They're offering us food now. What could they possibly not want to be good for? Let's just go. And so they just all go. And the one dissenting opinion's like, all right, fine. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, this is so dumb, but whatever, it's fine. They're just
Yeah.
naive. So yeah, the Daleks set up the trap. Then the doctor and the companions kind of rescue them. They all get away, and now the doctor is like, "Well, you got to fight back because they want to exterminate you." And the Thal are like, "Well, we don't fight." And he basically figures out a way to convince them to fight
Yeah.
by faking taking one of them to go exchange it for the part for the TARDIS they need because they cannot leave because the Daleks took the little fluid transfer tube. So they've got to go back into the city to get that. And then we get this devised plan of, all right, we're gonna invade. We're gonna go on the attack. So a bunch of us are gonna go to the front door, and we're gonna send a small pack of commandos around the backside through the death swamp. So it's nice and tropey, and I absolutely loved. We get to the swamp, and it's Ian and Barbara and three of the Thal. They're the group that's going to go through and find like the back entrance in because the city is surrounded on three sides by walls and mountain, but the one side is left open because it's also the side where this deadly swamp is. And so they go in, they get partway into it, and Barbara's like, "I need to sit down. I'm tired." And so they sit down. And immediately, Ian goes over. He's like, "I could use a wash," and just starts like splashing death swamp water on his face. I'm like, "What are you
Yeah.
doing, you crazy person?" Sticks his head in the water, sees something, gets all scared by it, and they go to like leave or whatever. And one of the Thal says, "I'll stay behind and fill up the water bags and catch up to you." And my note was like, well, got to thin out this group somehow. One of the red shirts has got to go. Like, come on, somebody born without any self-preservation instincts? Jeez. Because you knew as soon as he got separated from the group, that Thal is not making it the rest of the way. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. He died tragically off screen. There was a lot of, I noticed in this, a lot of off screen action. A lot of things happened during the cutaway, which, if you're a fan of Mystery Science Theater 3000, you've probably heard that joke before of like, well, anything's possible during the cutaway. And this
Yeah.
movie went for it because when the group breaks out of their cell. Their genius thing, right? They figure out that the metal floors and walls and everything is how the Daleks move around, some form of static electricity that powers their suits. And so they need to insulate the Daleks from the floor in order to kind of do something. I don't know what. And I like that idea. And so they do that. I do have to wonder, how long was Barbara standing there with pudding on her hand?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she sees it on the food tray and just grabs it, and then we fade out and fade back in, and they're waiting for the Dalek to come back with more food, which tells me it's the next meal. So we're talking hours. She's just been standing there with this whatever it is in her hand, which had to have just been anyway. When they do all of that, they short circuit the Dalek and take it out of the machine, and Ian gets into it and pilots it basically, or they move him around, right?
Now, an interesting thing about that in the TV serial, it was the Doctor that did it.
Yeah, they did a little bit of switching with Ian and the Doctor and some of the stuff.
They did. There's a lot of switching between characters. It's hold on, I had it up. I had all this ready to go because I was actually interested in everything that was different.
But one of the things they did was they end up in a room with a lift, and Ian can't get out of the Dalek. He's stuck
Yeah.
in there, and the other Daleks are coming for him, and then it cuts away, and when it comes back, he's gotten out, and we never see it. Like, that happens so
No.
many times, and it got to the point of just making me laugh when
Y-
something dire would be happening, and then we just cut away and come back, and everything's fine.
Yep. No. In this case, okay. For example, Ian was the first in the series, was the one to find Scarrow.
Okay.
In the movie's case, it was Susan.
Mhm.
In the TV show, it was Ian that discovered the fluid link that needed mercury was
Okay.
missing. In the movie, it's Susan.
Yeah.
Like there were a lot of things that and it was in the movie. It was when they left Scarrow that
Okay.
she noticed it was missing. In the TV show, it was basically once they got to the planet Scarrow, the Doctor said, "Well, we need to go in and get this fixed and everything else." And then it wasn't missing. And so there were changes. I can understand why they did the changes.
Mhm. Plus, I think too,
It's
if you're
just
going to adapt something, make some changes to it, even if they're,
yeah,
because a lot of that's
just a little.
innocuous. you know,
Now, a big change that they made in the movie, obviously, was the casting of Peter Cushing,
sure.
which made William Hartnell very upset
Yeah, I
because
heard that he was a little annoyed.
he wanted to play the Doctor in the movie, but they decided to go with Peter Cushing instead.
He was, I think, more known internationally than William
That
Hartnell would
was
have been at the
exactly it.
time.
Yeah, that
Now,
was exactly it. They wanted to appeal to the American audience, so they took Peter Cushing, who was well known thanks to Hammer Horror,
mhm.
rather than a local. Basically, it would have been like in baseball, calling up the big star instead of the local guy from minor league.
Yeah, but the funny thing about it is Doctor Who was not uh, a big thing in the States at all when this movie came out,
No,
whereas, it obviously was in England. So it really didn't do much of anything in the States anyway. So it really
no, it really
didn't
didn't.
make much difference. But I think in the end, it was fine because it's not the same
Right.
character. So, you know, and
Eh.
Hartnell is known as the first Doctor, and most people forget that Peter Cushing was. Although I will say, I liked him in this quite a bit.
Oh yeah,
He was
he was
fun.
great.
He
Yeah.
was perfect as the kind of tottering old, uh, little bit frail. He was like hunched over a little bit, and like his walk was almost a waddle. I just loved all his little affectations.
Apparently, they
I
did
you know,
that on purpose. They
yeah,
apparently, when they created the character, they took it based off the fact that Susan would call William Hartnell's character grandfather.
yeah. That makes sense.
Like, he wasn't the doctor to Susan. And even to Ian Barber, he wasn't so much the doctor, because in one episode, Ian even says, well, if only we knew his name, we could figure this all out. Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And so he was just Susan's grandfather to them. So when they created the character, they purposely took the human Doctor Who, and
Yeah.
I do have to keep emphasizing it's human Doctor Who, not Time Lord, not Timeless Child, not
Yeah.
human Doctor Who. Because trust me, I'm one that gets into arguments with people that he's not really the Doctor, but I've also started coming around that, you know what? He kind of is. But when they created the character, they purposely took the aspects of the grandfather
Yeah.
and put him in the movie rather than the mad scientist and the grumpy old man.
Yeah, and I kind of like that because he's a softer version, and it fits
Yes.
better too with Susan being like 11. So a
Yeah,
little bit younger Susan, you've got a little bit more approachable. It also makes the character more approachable in general to a wider audience. So I think that works. Because if he's curmudgeonly too much, then I think you immediately kind of put off some of your potential audience.
absolutely.
So there is
I
that. But
mean,
they have their. I also love how everything just kind of coalesced at the end of this movie very quickly. Like very quickly, yet did the movie trope thing of a countdown that is not counting down properly at all, because that countdown cracked me up. But
yeah.
uh, like I timed it out, and that planet was destroyed 3 or 4 times over with an actual countdown. Plus, even when they were showing the countdown, the timing would be different in certain scenes. Like sometimes it would be right on the second marks, and other times it was a lot longer in between them.
Hmm.
It really it killed me. But like the whole end fight does end up feeling a little anticlimactic because it just happens so quickly. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, it was a little fast. I do like the aspect that the Daleks froze themselves,
yeah,
for example. And, basically the city with the Daleks was destroyed. And, if this would have continued as a TV series, obviously, I think eventually they would have. I don't know if they would have. See, that's one of the big things about the difference between a TV show and, say, a movie. A movie, you really can't bring villains back.
it's a lot more difficult to
Yeah,
do. It's translating anything between mediums is hard because television
yeah,
and series and serialized storytelling is not the same as a film.
right. Which is why I'm saying in a movie like the Daleks, if the movie series would have continued, and there's rumors that they were going to do like 5 or 6 movies with Peter Cushing.
Mhm.
If they would have done that, they wouldn't have been able to bring the Daleks back because it's a movie. Once the Daleks are, the only thing that dies in movies, so realistically, is Uncle Ben. But I don't think they could have brought the Daleks back. I think they would have had to continue on to the Cybermen, and then at some point bring the Master into the movies and everything. And I don't know that if that, based on the fact that they went with Eric Roberts in 1996, I'm honestly not sure how they would have done in the 60s and 70s with that. But but yet in this TV show, every like other episode, it feels like the Daleks are there,
Well, at
and yet
first they
it
were
still
extremely
works.
popular. Like it was, I mean, this movie was to capitalize on Dalek mania. Like
Yeah.
they had, and in fact, they took Daleks to Cannes the year this
Hmm.
came out. All sorts of stuff. Like they were all over the place there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the group and with the Thal end up stopping the Daleks. I do like that Ian, for as bumbling and kind of idiotic as he could be at times. Which, by the
Hey.
way, actor playing Ian was Roy Castle.
Yep.
In this movie, in particular, I got not strong, but I got a little bit of a young uh, shoot the name the Who
Um.
Roger
As in
Daltrey.
the band.
Roger, yeah,
Yeah,
Roger Daltrey. A little young Roger Daltrey in there.
I can see it.
Like you could cast him, and he would have been, I think, fit really well because he has that same kind of energy about him.
Yeah.
But I do like that Ian gets to be the one that gets the Daleks to stop the countdown by shooting their own computer, um, which was pretty fantastic. By the way, okay, say what you want about the story or the adaptation or whether it fits in the canon or not. The overall production design of this, really good. Like, it's
Oh,
really
it was
cool looking.
superb.
Like, it
Yeah, it was
felt,
superb.
I mean, it is, for all intents and purposes, it is a mid 60s sci fi B movie, right? Which is what,
Yeah.
at its heart, Doctor Who was a sci fi B series. So to get
Yeah.
a little bit bigger of a budget than you're going to get from television, they expanded on things. And I thought, like, the Dalek Control Center, that whole room, that set was really cool because it was big, spacious, that really big kind of computer wall that had the almost like slot machine tumblers that could rotate to different screens or different banks of parts. I thought was really cool looking. Um, Granted, all the hallways looked the same and just were basically hallways of pink plastic sheeting, which was fine. Um, but
Yeah.
but
I
that
think what I liked.
go
No,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was just going to
Sorry.
say the Dalek Control Center, the front of the city, with that kind of mountain, the top of the mountain, and then the entrance to the city. I thought was a really cool set, and I loved the petrified jungle. Because yes, it looked like a film set, but with the stylized lighting that they put on there, that blue and green lighting gave it that sort of otherworldly feel, and I thought that worked
Yeah.
really well because it didn't feel like Earth at all, which is what you needed.
Which is actually what I was gonna push on to. The jungle, especially, looked
Yeah.
really alien, and they did that without the anamorphic lens.
Hmm. Yeah, it looked great. I loved all of that stuff. I also
Yeah.
loved that matte painting when they're climbing up the mountain with the pipes, which again was another one of those scenes where it's like they're at the bottom. It's like, what are we gonna do? We'll climb, fade out, fade in. They're at the top. All right, cool. Um,
That was quintessential 60s for you.
yeah, but having
So,
said all that, that matte painting looked so cool. Just
yeah.
showing just this desolate planetscape. I really, really love that. And yeah, I mean, it just had a really cool look about it, and it had sci-fi noises all over the place, computer noises, which I may have captured and I might play here in a minute. Um, those were fun. You know, I love all that kind of stuff. So it really hit a note for me, and I did see this before, but I don't remember when I saw this because I started getting into Doctor Who in high school. So mid to late 90s was when I was kind of introduced to it. I had maybe
Well, there
come
was a movie
across.
that came. There was a Dalek documentary called Dalek Mania that came
Mhm,
out in 1995.
sure.
So, and they would have showed the movie at the same time they showed the documentary. So it's entirely possible that's where you saw it.
Well, so I don't, I'm sure I came across episodes of Doctor Who on like PBS at some point when I was young.
That too,
Um,
yeah.
but I was introduced to Doctor Who by a friend of mine with Tom Baker stuff on VHS tapes,
Hmm.
and that's where I got into Doctor Who. Was at that point with Tom Baker, and then I watched other stuff and was sort of here and there would watch it until the 2005 reboot happened. Um, so that was kind of my introduction to it. But I just loved like the whole look and that 60s feel. I did miss watching it this time when it opened, the theme. The Doctor Who theme for me is one of the greatest television themes
Hmm.
going. Like it's just I hear that and I'm instantly put in a happy place. And to not have that was a little bit jarring. The music that they had was cool and it fit the tone and the theme, the tone of this film. It was just so weird not to hear that classic Doctor Who theme
Yeah,
going on.
honestly, that's the only thing that was missing, and I was surprised they didn't get it. Just if you don't mind, Travis, a little bit of
Yeah, no,
trivia
go for it.
before you do the song clips.
Mhm.
For like on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie gets from the actual uh reviewers a 43%. It gets a 41% from the actual watchers like you and I. So
Yep.
it's a movie that's it's not going to hit a 50% mark. It's not going to be good by any standards, but it's well enough that to the reviewers, it's good enough to watch. Um, Peter Cushing was actually offered the role of the second Doctor.
Yeah, I did read that.
Yeah, based on this movie, and he declined. And then once he saw how popular the show was getting, he really regretted it. I know that earlier I stated that that
By the way, Peter
William.
Cushing did okay for himself in the long run, so I think he's
Oh
fine.
yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, he was just. But Doctor Who eventually became like. There's a lot of actors out there that as soon as you mention Doctor Who, they say that they were up for the role. They declined it, and then they regretted it. They did. I think Hugh Grant's one of them,
Yeah,
actually.
well, Doctor Who for a time was like its generation and a few generations worth of thing that was like, Game of Thrones was for the
Yeah,
last 15 years, where it's
totally.
like if you lived in the United Kingdom or surrounding that area, you were probably in some way connected to Doctor Who at some point. It ran for so long. You don't do, what is it, 700 episodes of the classic series, I think, or close to that, 690 something episodes.
Something like that, because it's almost 1,000 total.
Yeah, you don't get that much going unless without, a lot of participation and a lot of actors to be up for stuff like that. So it totally makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, Peter Cushing
Mm,
was, as we've mentioned, Hammer Horror and all of the horror
yeah.
stuff he had done. He was well known. In fact, like people forget when Star Wars came out, the two actors that anybody really knew who they were at the time in 1977, like Harrison Ford had been in a few movies, but he wasn't a star yet.
Right.
Carrie Fisher was not a star yet. Mark Hamill had not done much to that point. He'd done a little bit of acting. Like they'd all done some acting, but they weren't stars. The stars were Alec Guinness and Peter Cushing. Those were the names that
Yeah.
anybody would have known before Star Wars. Um, so yeah, I can see where he would have been offered the role of Doctor Who and probably been like, man, I should have done that. But it
Now
is what it is.
this movie was released in the UK as
Mhm.
the same at the same week as Mary Poppins.
That's a bummer.
They were
Like
both released at the same time in the theaters. Mary Poppins became a box office hit. Doctor Who and the Daleks did not.
now, it did make money, but it was a very low
Yes.
budget thing.
It really it was really low. Like I think it was 185,000 British pounds, which
Yeah,
today would be about £3.5 million budget.
yeah, which is, I mean, for a feature length film, nothing. Um,
Yeah.
it it made money, but it was no Mary Poppins. It's sort of, this movie got years later you would see the same thing happen with like Weird Al Yankovic's movie, UHF. It opened the same, I think the same weekend or within a week or two of Batman in 1989. Like
Yeah.
UHF didn't stand a chance, right? It's not fair.
Right.
It's the Thing opening just after ET, right? ET is taking all of the oxygen out of the room. Nobody wants to see a movie like The Thing in 1982 after they've seen ET, and it's so uplifting and all that. So, yeah, Mary
Yeah.
Poppins just stole all the thunder from this, which makes sense.
Right. And the end of the movie follows the end of the TV show in
Mhm.
that the TV show, actually, no, it didn't. The TV show went with The Edge of Destruction, which was just a two-part series called The Edge of Destruction
Mhm.
and The Brink of Destruction. The show that this episode references at the end of its movie is The Romans, the serial The Romans.
Yeah, and
Where
I get that. I kind of liked how we just sort of started and ended. There was no like big preamble
yeah,
and there was no big denouement. It was just like we jumped right into a story. I think my note was we're 5 minutes into the movie. We've met all the characters and we're already on another planet. And then
yeah,
when it ends, it was just like we're done. And it's just Ian running around crazy because he opened up the doors and saw a bunch of Roman soldiers, and now he's
Right.
doing whatever he
Because
does.
they thought they rematerialized on London shortly
Yeah.
before they left, and it turned out that they were in ancient Rome. Now there is a sequel to this movie too.
Yep. Yeah.
And the sequel it's called The Daleks Invasion 2150 AD.
Yeah.
It's based off another Dalek serial, the Dalek Invasion of Earth. And there's a connecting actor to the movie and the TV series. But I'm not going to say who because I really want to come back onto the show eventually and talk about that movie too.
Yeah, we can probably make that happen. It is one I don't know that I have seen. I think I have. Well, I don't know. I may not have actually watched Dalek Invasion 2150 AD.
I
So,
can definitely say that I have not. But I know of it, and I know the connecting actor, and he's a really beloved actor within the Doctor Who community, who has unfortunately passed on.
well, when we get to that movie, we'll talk about that. I did have a couple of things. Well, the main one was the Daleks. So we talked about how they were slightly redesigned for this, but they
Hmm.
also were going to initially shoot fire,
Yeah,
and they one logistically couldn't make that work in a safe way, and two, the sensors were like, maybe no fire, and so they just went with the steam coming out as there was a CO2 fire extinguisher inside there that they would use to shoot the gas out. Um, it's a silly look, but I also kind of liked it because again, it's just sci-fi to have like
yeah,
some kind of smoke steam thing, and it does whatever is needed at the time. It's a total plot plot driven weapon, and I kind of like that.
yeah. It was actually much better than shooting fire, to be perfectly honest.
Although I do love Blowtorch Dalek. He was fun.
Yeah,
Comes in,
yeah.
cuts the door, and he gets done cutting the door and just turns around and leaves. It's like, well, my work here is done, and just wheels off.
Eh,
And okay, I want to play some clips, but before I do, there's a couple of things I gotta mention about this movie that just tickled me because of the dumbness
sure.
of them. Number one was the Thal and their haircuts because they all had the same haircut, and
Yeah,
all of them had the same haircut that was basically like a bowl cut. It looked like the owner of the Las Vegas Raiders haircut. He's a billionaire with the worst possible haircut you have ever seen. Like somebody that's got billions of dollars should never have hair that looks like his. But that's all the Thal looked like that. This like bleach blonde, terrible haircut. Cracked me up. My single favorite image in this movie, though, and I'm going to make this into a GIF and post this online at some point. I have the video clip captured, and it is Ian and the Thal are making their way in at the end of the movie. Ian like leans against the pink plastic wall and makes some noise, and so the Daleks come after them and they run down the hallway. When the Daleks come around that corner, there's two of them, and they come flying around the corner chasing after him. One of them does a little like back end drift as he comes around the corner. You can tell whoever was operating it like wheeled around the corner, and the back end of the Dalek kicks out just a little bit, and they kind of slide drift and then correct it. I laughed so hard when that happened because the one turns nice and tight and the other one kind of slides around the corner, and it just tickled me. Like, this is the stuff I love that about these lower budget sci-fi movies. When
yeah,
when stuff like that happens, it just cracks me up. So like, yeah, those two things. The Thal in general, their look was ridiculous. And then that with the Daleks. I mean, the Daleks in general I loved, but that particular moment of the power sliding Dalek was my favorite thing in this movie. It just
Well,
tickled me.
speaking of gifts, there actually is a gift from this movie.
Mhm.
It's a Dalek spinning around, going over a barrier, falling into a hole with underneath it. It says, "I regret nothing."
Oh, that was a great
This-
one when the two of them grab the Dalek with the rope and just fling him into the
Mhm.
elevator shaft.
Yeah,
That was my second favorite part.
but it's funny because you can you can see, like, I'm watching it right now. You can, based off of the walls and everything, it's from the movie, not the show.
Oh yeah, yep. Because they're that like translucent pink wall. It was so good.
Yeah,
Now I did capture some audio. I'd be remiss if I don't play a little
absolutely.
bit of this.
Of course.
We're going to start with a couple of lines from The Thal because for some reason a lot of what they said just, I don't know, made me laugh. This one didn't make me laugh so much, but I kind of liked as an introduction to the character when we're still at a point in the movie where we don't quite know who the good guys and the bad guys are on this planet. And the Thal, what is it? Aladon, I think is his name.
Yeah.
And he's meeting Susan and he says,
If they called us monsters, what must they be like?
I kind of liked that. That was a good one. It was a good line. But then later on, he's just, the guy's so naive.
If the Daleks have food, how can they refuse it to us?
How? How could they possibly refuse it to us? No, easily by saying, no, you can't have this. There you go. Problem solved. Also,
There's no reason not to believe their good intentions.
there is every reason not to believe their good intentions, Aladon. Every reason. You sweet summer child. Yeah, he was great. There was also, so I talked about water bag filler, red shirt Thal. That was like, okay, you're done. You're not coming back tomorrow to film, so we got to get rid of your character. But then the four of them climb the mountainside, and they get up to the top, and then there's the one Thal who also he gave me some young Stephen Merchant vibes in the way he looked. He reminded me a little bit of like Stephen Merchant, but he's sort of given this look of like, man, I don't want to be here anymore. I want to go home. And even says that like, I'm leaving. And they have their little fight and everything. After they get to that ravine and they have to jump over it, and he reluctantly does it, but then he falls. And so he's hanging there, and he's hanging by this rope, and he cuts the rope. Right. And you're just thinking, okay, well, they got rid of him. Right. He fell to his death. But then you cut away, you come back, and he's yelling for them, and you just hear,
Hey! Get me out of here!
and my note was, hey, you put yourself down there. This is your fault. And now he wants help. And we have no idea how they got him out of there because he's just back the next time we see them. It's perfect. Perfect. We don't need to know. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Loved it. Loved so much of that. Then the Daleks themselves. The first thing we hear from a Dalek in a movie, and this is the first time we're seeing Daleks in color. And the first thing we get is,
You will move ahead of us and follow directions.
you will move ahead of us and follow directions. That's the first lines of dialogue from a Dalek in this movie.
See, and that's one of the things I didn't like about the movie. Play up the Daleks. At this point, they're the Doctor's biggest and greatest enemy. And you couldn't go with exterminate or locate, destroy. You couldn't.
But they were still like, again, this was still fairly early, so they were his most popular enemy. I don't know that they were considered his greatest yet.
At this point, they would have been. And there's a fun fact about that. The producer and creator of the show, Sidney Newman, didn't want, as he put it, bug-eyed monsters in the show.
Right.
So the producer, Verity Lambert, was struggling to find a monster to face the Doctor because she was starting to shift it away from the cartoonish educational programming and more to traditional sci-fi.
Yeah.
And Terry Nation created the Daleks and everything. And she pitches them to Sidney Newman, who reminded her that he didn't want bug-eyed monsters in the show. And she said, no, Sidney, give it a try. she's like, this is based on the most evil beings we have seen in like this would have been just after World War II, so it would have been like the past 20 years.
Yeah.
Like it was just after World War II, but by the 60s, people were starting to kind of forget almost. So she's like, these are based off the Nazis.
Mhm.
Just watch it, give it a try, and the rest is history.
Although it is kind of ironic that the Daleks are based off of the Nazis and the Thal are all blonde-haired, physically fit, tall.
In the show, the Thals originally had almost, especially when Tom Baker was on, they had almost Nazi-like paraphernalia on their uniforms.
It's
They had to
funny
go,
to me.
yeah, but they had to go back in and change that because I think in a couple of scenes you could actually see that they had swastikas and everything.
Probably. So that was the first line from the Dalek. Then I captured two more, and this was towards the end. Now they've already, at this point, the Daleks have decided we're going for the end solution, and we are going to drop the neutron bomb, which technically the neutron bomb had not been invented yet, but the theory had been around. So it wasn't like a fully, oh, we're just making something up here for the show. But we get the one Dalek, the black one, saying,
This is the final battle.
and I think that was a case of having to edit the voice a little bit to match the lights because that cadence doesn't quite feel Dalek.
It didn't. And the neutron bomb hadn't been invented yet, but the idea and the concept was not new at this
Mhm.
point.
Yeah. But I did like this is the final battle, and then you get all, and then it's and that shot was cool because it was looking up at that Dalek, and then we get a reverse shot looking out at all the other Daleks sitting around, and they just all say,
Destroy the house.
that was good. I like that quite a bit. The Doctor himself has a couple of good lines. Okay. One of the things I've always loved about Doctor Who in general is that the TARDIS is time and relative dimension in space. And they make it a point that he doesn't just travel through time, but also through space. Because that's important. If you just travel through time, the best gag of that ever is Red Dwarf, right? I don't know if you're familiar with that one where they travel and it's like, wait, why does it all look the same? Well, we just traveled through time. We didn't travel through space. We're in the same time, however far in the future, or whatever it was. But I like that in the movie here, when he brings Ian inside the TARDIS and he tells him,
You are privileged, young man, to be the first visitor to our time and space machine.
calling it a time and space machine. I like that. I like that a lot. I wish that was done more. I also, they end up on the other planet, right? They go outside, they look around, they want to leave. They go back in, and then Barbara says this to Ian.
Well, you got us here. You might as well get us back.
No, Babs. No. Ian didn't get them there. You did. Barbara, her hormones are what got them there because she came in and immediately tried to make out with Ian and backed him into the lever. That's not his fault.
No.
I'm going to defend Ian in this case. He is a bumbling fool, but that wasn't his fault entirely.
No.
Not entirely his fault. That one just made me laugh. I'm like, come on, Barbara, really? I also like that when Ian first showed up, he had the thing of chocolates, and they were soft centers, which is Barbara's favorite. And that joke gets paid off when they find the petrified creature, lizard. I don't know what that thing was.
Yeah, I can't remember.
And once again, through just folly of errors, Ian falls into it and it breaks apart, and we get this little exchange with him and Doctor Who.
Nothing broken, lad?
No, it was another soft center.
It was another soft center. I liked that quite a bit. I mentioned it earlier how they have the fluid exchange thing or whatever, and it needs more mercury, right? And the TARDIS won't work without that, and so they have to go into the city, and then the Doctor has to reveal.
I have to confess. There is nothing wrong with the fluid link. I just didn't want to leave until we had explored the city. Please forgive me.
I mean, good on him for fessing up. Too little, too late, but still, it was nice of you to do, Doctor.
Yeah. I will point out that was a very Doctor behavior.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Like, I could easily see Patrick Troughton or Tom Baker or David Tennant or Matt Smith doing exactly this.
100%. That felt right in line with the character of like, well, I want to do this thing. I'm going to create a situation where we get to do this thing. And then, ooh, it's all gone sideways. Look, I'm sorry. All right. I did a thing and now we're here, but let's make the most of it.
Yeah.
Allons-y and all that. I had to because, again, 60s sci-fi. You're going to get this. And I just captured a couple seconds of. I just love them. I love the beeps and the bloops and the bleeps and the whirs and just all that fun stuff. Like, man, 50s, 60s sci-fi when it was just anything goes. We had no, like, the pulpy sci-fi where it's sort of like early comics, right? Like early Stan Lee comics where he doesn't know what the hell a gamma ray is, but it sounds cool, so we're going to use it, right?
Yeah.
I just love stuff like that. There's just a certain kind of comforting, warm feeling about, the sounds of the bridge in the original series of Star Trek or anything that's in these old sci-fi movies. Love them.
Now, to be
Love it
fair,
all.
you can hear this sound still in Doctor Who.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's just what makes it so. That's why I was sitting there. People couldn't see it unless you're watching the live stream. I was sitting there with just my eyes closed, looking up, and my fish is going, yes.
Yep, just soaking in all the bleeps, the bloops, the beeps, the whirs, and all those fun noises. And one last one, and it's just Peter Cushing. And I just love this delivery.
It's a Lilium philadelphicum.
Is it now?
Is it now? And that little chuckle. He was just fun, man.
He was.
He really was enjoying himself, and you can just kind of feel it. And I just love that grandfatherly feel to him. Like I say, he was always a little bit hunched over, and just he like this doctor just wanted to explore and loved the fact that they were on an alien planet. And it's the trope of like they're dealing with the fact that they're on an alien planet really well.
Yeah.
For all that to happen, there's no shock. No one's really having too much trouble with it. Meeting alien species, all that.
What's funny about that clip is that Peter Cushing was a botanist as a hobbyist.
Yep.
And he came up with that name.
I loved it because it sounded really cool.
Alien.
And then I read.
Yeah, it sounded very alien.
Yeah, and then I read that, but I love it's Susan that says it, and he's just like,
yeah.
No, fascinating.
Now, just real quick. I know we're not going to stay long, but just real quick, the reason there's so much confusion about Peter Cushing's Doctor and where he fits within the Doctor Who canon, if you want to call it that, because there's really because the show contradicts itself all the time.
Mm-hmm. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Yeah. In official licensed merchandise, many of the actions and mannerisms of the Peter Cushing Doctor are attributed to William Hartnell.
I could see that. Yeah.
And in the 60s and 70s, as they were coming out with merchandise for Doctor Who, he was considered one of the doctors. Like it was William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton, John Pertwee, who was wonderful, Tom Baker, who's iconic, and Peter Cushing listed as the 5 doctors.
Mm-hmm.
And there were comic books made about the movie that basically said he was the Doctor and everything else. More modern times, we see him as more of, and even back then, they also would have said that he was more of a fictionalized version within the show and various stuff related to the show. He's either a creation of the Doctor's mental capacities, representing the more optimistic nature of the Doctor. He's much like the Dream Lord or the Valiard or any thing that you want to think of from the show itself, and that he's a manifestation of the Doctor who is the Doctor but isn't the Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
The Dalek, there's a book that's in universe but isn't like a novel or anything. It's called the Dalek Survival Guide, and the Daleks even have an explanation for the difference between the Doctor and Doctor Who, and that there are two separate timelines that at times converge, at times don't. So it's to use the quote, it's a big ball of wibbly wobbly timey wimey stuff.
Yep. And really, like, what it comes down to for me is, if you want everything to have to be interconnected, you can find a way to explain this into that and make it a part of it if you want to. Or it can just be its own separate thing. Because of
Absolutely.
how early on in the series there wasn't there wasn't even 10 years. There was a year and a half, maybe 2 years worth of show before this movie came out. So you don't
Yep.
have all of this lore that then, oh, this doesn't fit with any of that. Well, at the time, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, didn't.
You know, it's again kind of using the same thing with early comic books. How many early comics, like DC Comics, had to go back and retroactively, I mean, retcon is a term born out of retroactive continuity, because they had to take all of these different storylines and try to feed them into one.
Heck, even a couple of years ago in Wonder Woman special for her, I think it was her 75th or 80th anniversary, they retconned her as being the first superhero.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that Batman and Superman came before her in real life.
Yeah. So, like, this kind of stuff happens all the time. And when something is young and new, you get different adaptations and different interpretations, and then you can do with them as you will. I know a lot of people that will immediately write off this movie as it's terrible because it's not the series. That's fine. If that's the way you feel, I'm not going to tell you have to watch it. I will say, if you take just the William Hartnell 7-part serial and this movie and put them side by side, not taking any of the rest of Doctor Who canon and series and any of that stuff into consideration, just take that 7-parter in this movie and put them side by side, and I would say that the movie is more approachable than the 7-part serial on its
Yeah,
own, in a
yeah.
vacuum.
If you take just the movie, ignore everything else that you've known for 61 years, which, by the way, happy birthday, Doctor Who. Yesterday
Yep.
was the 61st anniversary.
Yes, it
The
was.
movie is a lot easier to comprehend and a lot easier to know.
Mhm.
If you take everything that all 61 years of Doctor Who, which, you know, it's 61 years. That's a lot of years.
A lot of
Even
stuff.
for a non-continuous shit. Like, it stopped in 1989, 1990, came back for a movie in 1996, came back in 2005. So 61 years is a lot of time. Personally, prior to me watching this movie, I would have been one of those people that just wrote it off. Oh, it's a horrible movie. Okay, Peter Cushing's a good actor, but can he really compare to William Hartnell?
Mhm.
Upon watching it, it's a fantastic movie. Like, if you take it purely, like, ignore the Doctor Who aspects.
Yeah, just as a
It's
60s sci-fi movie.
yeah. If you take it just as a '60s science fiction movie, it's fantastic. Now, I'm a Whovian, so I do kind of have, I do sit there and go, well, okay, yeah, he's not William Hartnell, he's not the original, the definite article, but he's still good. Personally, at this point for me, I'm taking the unit explanation from Day of the Doctor, where Unit, like in universe, Unit produced these movies
Sure.
to give a fictionalized version of the Doctor to the masses, and I think that's perfectly fine. If you want to say that Peter Cushing is the Doctor, I'm not going to fight you over it. You believe. I mean, I'll agree with you.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to fight you about it either. Like, if you say he's not, fine. You think he's not, there is 61 years of canon for Doctor Who. And even then, it's not considered canon because you also got the Big Finish, you got the Sarah Jane Adventures, you got spin offs, you got the Curse of the Fatal Death. as a
Yeah.
comedy aspect of it. With Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, you had the timeless child. Many people don't like that aspect of the Doctor. What I would say is that there was a similar plan in the 1980s known as the Cartmel Master Plan that was supposed to do the same thing, just with Sylvester McCoy's Doctor. There are people that will sit there, oh, well, David Tennant's the last true Doctor. Matt Smith doesn't count. Peter Capaldi doesn't. Really? Get a life, first off. Second off, there's 61, like I said, like you keep saying, there's 61 years of canon that many things don't even consider canon. Like, we're about to get a spin-off show
Mhm.
about the sea monsters
Yeah.
or the
I mean,
sea devils. So
when it comes
if you
down
want to
to it,
include Peter,
yeah. Like, when it comes down to it, what you want the canon of Doctor Who to be is going to be whatever you decide it's going to be, which is much
yeah,
like what the
yeah,
show did. The show would contradict itself all the time, and still
yeah,
does. So you can have
yeah,
whichever part of it you want. That's the one. That's the beauty of all of the ongoing series and things that have happened over the
yeah.
years. Doctor Who is like the poster child
Doctor
for
Who,
making it up as you go.
Doctor Who isn't Star Trek. Star Trek, there is a linear point of view. There is the original series, the animated adventures, Next Generation, Archer and Enterprise came out to show the beginnings. You had Deep Space Nine, Voyager. Like, there's a and then you have the J.J. Abrams movies, which I'm not getting into at all. They can do their own thing. I'm going to stick to the main timeline. But Doctor Who's not like that. There is no realistic set linear time, because you could literally have the first Doctor in the same area as the 10th Doctor, as the same area as the 11th Doctor, all within the same time period, and as long as they don't interact, none of it's not canon.
And even then, when they do interact, it really doesn't matter. Like, kind of what
Within the
Doctor
show,
Who is always good about.
yeah, yeah. I mean, within the show, it kind of does, because only the most current Doctor remembers everything that happens with multiple Doctors. But realistically, in the show's point of view, it doesn't matter. Enjoy it. This movie was great.
Yeah, it was super fun. This is a fun, and it's an hour and 22 minutes. It's breezy, cheeseball, 60s sci-fi fun. And if you look at it from that perspective, I think it's well worth a watch. I did notice, at least in the US, it is free to stream on YouTube right now.
Yes, with ads.
So you can watch it there if you want to. And I think it's worth a watch. It's fun.
You can also rent it for $3.99 on Amazon, or buy it
Mhm.
for $5.99.
Yeah. And if you're a completionist, or just I wanna have, add stuff to my library, I think that's worth it.
Yeah.
Because again, it's just a fun, silly little movie.
Now, I watched it on YouTube with the ads and everything, but it didn't detract from it either.
No, and it's a good transfer as well. It looks really good because they went back through, and like the version that I watched looked great. It didn't suffer from being, 60 something years old, and like a bad transfer of old film or something. They really cleaned it up, and it looked good. It sounded good.
Well, that's because it's been released on Blu-ray and 4K and
Yep.
everything else as well.
Yep. So definitely check it out because I think it's worth it. But no, this was a fun conversation and a really fun movie to talk about. So Ace, it was great having you back. It's been a while,
It has.
but it's always fun. So have you got anything you wanna plug or you want to mention?
I do have two things, if you don't mind. The first thing is I actually stream now. I haven't lately. That's because life's been, with the election, has been really chaotic for me. I've been literally involved in the complete election process. Like, I was a canvasser. I stood at a polling place. I watched all the trials and counts and recounts here in Pennsylvania. But my username on Twitch is what is it? Oh, Real Ash Cat. So
Okay.
twitch.tv/realashcat. I typically stream right now every Tuesday from 5 to 7, and then Thursday from 5 to basically whenever I get bored. I only really play Final Fantasy 14 online right now because that's what I can afford. If I had the ability to afford games on Steam and all that, I absolutely would. Maybe I'll start doing Hearthstone or something. I don't know. the other thing is right now, I don't want to get political, but I did mention the election. And I'm going to start crying if I mention this, but the election is going to be the post-election stuff is going to be really hard for a lot of people. But right now, it's going to be especially hard for trans people like me.
Mhm.
We're sitting here terrified right now, not sure what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our lives, and everything else. And so I would encourage your listeners, Travis, to go to translifeline, all one word, .org, and donate to the organization and find out how you can help out in general in your local community. And if you happen to know any trans people, please just give them a hug right now and let them know that you're there to fight for them.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Oh, and in the meantime, check out the streams and watch you play some Final Fantasy 14. Get a little escapism. That's always fun, and it's
Yeah.
a fun game.
Yeah, because I actually do voice, I don't voice all the characters, but the main character, the Warrior of Light, I do give voice to because they don't have a voice in game.
Excellent.
So you get to hear my character's thoughts in real time.
So definitely one more time, what's the Twitch handle where they can find you doing that?
It's twitch.tv/realashcat. That's REALASHCAT.
All right. Real Ash Cat. Check it out. Final Fantasy 14 stuff. So good having you back. And it was a real fun to talk about Doctor Who and this weird spin-off version of Doctor Who too. Because
Definitely.
I
We're going to
always
have to
love
come
that
back
kind of
for the
stuff.
sequel for sure.
Yeah.
We have to come back for the sequel.
Well, now we do for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now next week I'm going in a very different direction. I'm going to be watching a New Zealand zombie sheep comedy called Black Sheep. And it's going to be, my guest will be Jenna from the Horse Girls podcast. We had Tim on recently from the show, and now Jenna's coming on to talk about this movie. She has not seen it. I did actually see this at a midnight showing during a film festival. I have thoughts on it. I haven't seen it since then, so it's going to be really fun to go back and revisit it, and I can't wait to get her thoughts on it as well. It's called Black Sheep, and just search around online, see if you can find that ahead of time. But that's what's coming up next week as we inch ever closer to episode 300 of this show. And if you like watching the show live, you can do that twitch.tv/tvstravis or youtube.com/@tvstravis every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And then it comes out as a podcast anywhere you get your podcasts every Wednesday, YouTube in a video form on Wednesdays. If you want to get it a few days early, you can do that by being a patron. You can go to patreon.com/WYHS, back the show for as little as $5 a month. I did have to change my billing style to monthly now. But for as little as $5 a month, so less than a cup of coffee every month, you can back the show. That helps me to do things like expand it, do extra stuff, movie nights, patron exclusive episodes of things, as well as my live shows. And I did live this year in Las Vegas and then again in Atlanta at DragonCon. And I just got some feedback from DragonCon from people that were at the live show. And it was really cool to read. And I can't wait to do that again. And the patrons, you help me to get to go to these live things. And I want to do more of those. So if you can help, that's great. If not, I understand. And just being a listener to the show is more than I could ever hope for. And you can also go to tvstravis.com. There's a merch store there with my dumb logo on a bunch of stuff. You can find all the past episodes of this show and other shows that I work on there. So definitely check that out, tvstravis.com. It's also got links for the Discord. You can join up and chat with us about movies and models and miniatures and games and all sorts of stuff there as well. And I am on all of the social networks as TV's Travis. That's where you can find me. Well, Ash, thank you for being here. And we will definitely do Doctor Who and the Dalek invasion of 2150 AD at some point. I'll get that on the list. So until next week, and Black Sheep. I can't wait for this. This is going to be fun. I just want to say to enjoy your movies. And look, let's be excellent to each other, all right? This has been Wait You Haven't Seen.
We could be anywhere in the universe and at any time. Rather exciting, isn't it?
'Tis rather exciting.